I'm ending my 10-year marriage because of a 3-minute song. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like a punchline to a bad joke or the most shallow reason anyone has ever given for walking away from a decade of history, 2 children, and a mortgage. But before you judge me, before you click away thinking I'm just another person overreacting to a minor quirk, I want you to imagine something for a second. Imagine living in a house where nothing ever finishes. Imagine a world where every climax is cut short, every beautiful moment is interrupted just as it reaches its peak, and the person you love most in the world is the one holding the remote, constantly pulling the rug out from under your feet. It's not just about the music, it's about the silence that never comes, and the resolution that's always just out of reach. It's about the slow, agonizing erosion of a person's peace of mind. Our house used to be a sanctuary of sound. When people talk about musical households, they usually mean there's a dusty guitar in the corner or a kid who takes reluctant trumpet lessons once a week. That wasn't us. Our home was built on a foundation of melody. I've been a pianist since I was 5 years old. For me, the piano isn't just an instrument, it's an extension of my nervous system. I feel the ivory under my fingertips like a second skin. My husband David is a guitarist and a singer, or at least he was. We met in a dimly lit university practice room, our voices harmonizing before we even knew each other's last names. It was effortless, it was perfect. We were the couple that had a soundtrack for everything, the couple that believed a life without music was a life not worth living. We have 2 kids now, 7 and 9. They are beautiful, bright, and naturally they follow in our footsteps. They take piano and singing lessons, and our afternoons are usually filled with the stumbling, sweet sounds of scales and beginner concertos. Or they were until the skipping started to feel less like a habit and more like a psychological assault. You see, David is a chronic song skipper, and when I say chronic, I don't mean he skips the occasional track he's not in the mood for. I mean that in 10 years of marriage, I can count on my hands the number of times we have actually heard a song from the first note to the very last. It started small. We'd be driving a song, would get to the second verse, and he'd tap the screen. Oh, this one's good, but have you heard the live version of this other track? Click. The mood would shift, the energy would break, I'd feel a tiny bit of friction in my brain, that human need for completion, but I'd let it go. He was excited, he was passionate, he just wanted to share something better. But better became the enemy of good, and better eventually became the enemy of my sanity. As the years went by, the skipping didn't just stay in the car. It invaded our living room, it invaded our dinners, it even invaded our own performances. David will pick up his acoustic guitar, sit on the edge of the sofa, and begin to play. He has this soulful, raspy voice that used to make my heart ache in the best way possible. He'll start a ballad, something slow and building, and just as the bridge hits, just as the emotions are peaking and I'm closing my eyes to let the music wash over me, he'll stop. He'll just stop mid-chord. Actually, he'll say his fingers already adjusting the tuning pegs or reaching for his phone. I just remembered this riff from that 70s B-side. It's way more interesting. The silence that follows that interruption is deafening. It's like being dropped from a height. You're floating, you're soaring with the melody, and then suddenly nothing. Just the sound of his thumb scrolling or his voice excitedly explaining why the next 30 seconds of a different song are more worth our time. He does it to the kids too. Our daughter will be sitting at the piano working through a piece she's finally mastered, her little face scrunched in concentration. She'll get to the final movement, the part she's worked so hard on, and David will walk through the room. "Hey honey, that's great, but try this instead." He'll say, leaning over her to play a different melody, effectively erasing the work she just did. He thinks he's being helpful. He thinks he's curating our lives. But what he's actually doing is teaching us that nothing we do or listen to is ever enough to hold his attention to the end. I've reached a point where I don't even play the piano anymore. The instrument that was my lifeline, my passion, sits in the alcove of our dining room like a tombstone. I can't bring myself to sit down and play because I know with a mathematical certainty that I won't be allowed to finish. I'll get halfway through a Chopin nocturne and I'll hear his footsteps. I'll feel the tension in my shoulders. I'll wait for the, "Oh, hold on, listen to this," or the, "You should try it in this key." It has turned a source of joy into a source of profound resentment. It's gotten so bad that I recently did something I never thought I'd do. We've always shared a car. It made sense we live in a walkable area and try to be conscious of our footprint. But last month I went out and bought a car of my own. I told him it was for work, that my schedule was getting too hectic to coordinate. But the truth, I bought it so I could listen to one single song. I remember the first day I drove it alone. I sat in the driveway, connected my phone, and picked a song I love. It was a long one, 8 minutes of building orchestral rock. As the music played, I found myself gripping the steering wheel, my heart racing. I was waiting for the skip. I was waiting for the interruption. When the song reached the 4-minute mark, I actually gasped. By the 6-minute mark, I was crying. And when the final note finally faded into actual earned silence, I sat there and sobbed. I had forgotten what it felt like to finish something. I had forgotten what it felt like to be respected enough to be allowed a complete experience. David doesn't see it. To him, it's a joke. He'll even pull his phone out when no music is playing, intending to change a song and then realize the room is silent. He laughs it off. "I'm just wired for the next thing," he says. He doesn't realize that the next thing is destroying this thing, our marriage. It has bled into every aspect of our lives. Our conversations are fragmented. Our intimacy is a series of starts and stops. I feel like I'm living my life in 30-second snippets, a trailer for a movie that never actually premieres. I've tried talking to him. I've sat him down and told him, David, when you skip, it feels like you're skipping me. It feels like you're saying that what we're experiencing right now isn't worth the time it takes to complete. He apologizes. He looks sincere. He says he doesn't even realize he's doing it. And then 10 minutes later, we're in the kitchen. A song comes on the speakers and click. The resentment is a physical weight now. It's a cold stone in my chest. I look at him and I don't see the man I harmonized with in that practice room. I see a man who is perpetually bored of the present moment. I see a man who is so obsessed with the better version of the future that he's willing to kill the beauty of the now. Am I crazy? Am I really going to end a decade of marriage over a Spotify habit? Or is this small thing actually the biggest thing in the world? The weight of it all really started to sink in during my 35th birthday. We were having a quiet dinner at home, just the four of us. I had spent the afternoon cooking, trying to create an atmosphere of warmth and connection. I'd even put together a playlist of songs that meant something to us, tracks from our early dating days, the song we danced to at our wedding, the lullabies we sang to the kids when they were babies. I wanted to feel that thread of history, that melody of our lives winding through the room. We were halfway through the second course when our wedding song started to play. It's a slow sweeping ballad that builds into this incredible orchestral finish. As the first few notes drifted through the air, I felt a genuine smile touch my lips. I looked across the table at David, expecting to see that same spark of recognition in his eyes. For a second, I thought we were having a moment. I thought maybe this is the reset button. Maybe we can find our rhythm again. But before the first verse was even over, David's hand was already moving toward his phone. It was like a reflex, an itch he couldn't help but scratch. "Oh, you know what?" he said, his voice cutting right through the lyrics. "This version is fine, but there's this acoustic cover by this indie artist I found last week. The chord progression in the bridge is way more sophisticated. You have to hear it." Click. The air in the room shifted instantly. The nostalgia, the warmth, the connection, it all vanished, replaced by the jarring start of a completely different song with a completely different energy. I sat there with my fork halfway to my mouth, feeling a lump form in my throat. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I just looked down at my plate and realized that my wedding song, the song that was supposed to represent our eternal commitment, wasn't even worth 3 minutes of his time. That was the night the resentment started to turn into something sharper, something more permanent. I realized then that David wasn't just excited about music, he was addicted to the novelty. He was so terrified of being bored, so desperate for the next hit of dopamine from a better sound, that he had become incapable of actually experiencing the life he was living. It started affecting the kids in ways that broke my heart. My 9-year-old son Leo has been working on a specific jazz piece for months. He's talented, but he's a perfectionist, and he struggles with confidence. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen when I heard him finally nail the difficult middle section. I could hear the joy in his playing. He was finally feeling it. Then I heard David's voice from the doorway. "Nice, Leo. But hey, if you swing that 8th note a bit more like this." And then I heard the sound of David's guitar cutting in. He didn't let Leo finish the piece. He didn't let him enjoy the triumph of reaching the final chord. He just hijacked the moment to show off a better technique. Leo stopped playing. The room went silent. I walked in and saw my son looking at his hands as if they had betrayed him. He didn't argue. He didn't get mad. He just quietly closed the piano lid and walked upstairs. He hasn't practiced for more than 10 minutes at a time since then. Why would he? In his mind, his music is just a placeholder for whatever better idea his father has. When I confronted David about it later that evening, he was genuinely baffled. "I'm just trying to help him improve," he said, his voice full of defensive sincerity. "I'm sharing my passion with him. Isn't that what we're supposed to do?" "No, David," I told him, my voice trembling. "You're not sharing. You're interrupting. You're taking over. You're telling him and you're telling me that what we are doing isn't good enough to be finished." He looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. He apologized, of course. He always apologizes. He'll say, "I'm sorry, I didn't realize I was doing it. I'll be more mindful." And for maybe an hour he is. He'll sit there visibly vibrating with the effort of not touching his phone, his leg bouncing nervously as he endures a full song. It makes me feel like a jailer. It makes me feel like I'm forcing him to undergo some kind of torture just to give me the basic courtesy of a shared experience. And that's when the phantom skipping started. We were sitting on the porch one evening. No music was playing. We were just watching the sunset, or at least I was. David was staring into space. Suddenly I saw his thumb twitch. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and tapped the screen twice before he even looked at it. He stared at the black screen for a second, then let out a hollow laugh. "I just realized," he said, shaking his head. "I just tried to skip the silence. I pulled out my phone to switch the music, and there wasn't even any music on." He thought it was funny. He thought it was a quirky little anecdote about how into music he is. But to me, it was terrifying. It was the moment I realized this wasn't just a bad habit. It was a neurological loop. He has conditioned his brain to never be satisfied with the present moment. If there's music, he wants different music. If there's silence, he wants sound. If he's with me, I have to wonder if he's already skipping ahead in his mind to a version of me that's more interesting, more better. It has completely killed our intimacy. How can you feel close to someone who is never actually there? When we're in bed, if I try to talk to him about my day, I can see his eyes darting toward his phone on the nightstand. I can feel him waiting for the chorus of the conversation so he can move on to the next thing. Even our sex life has become a casualty. It's all fragmented, all rushed, as if he's trying to get to the best part without doing any of the work to get there. There is no build-up. There is no lingering. There is only the skip. The resentment has turned into a wall. I find myself avoiding him. I find myself staying in my new car in the driveway for 20 minutes after I get home just so I can finish a podcast or an album in peace. That car is the only place in my life where I have autonomy, where I am the master of my own time and my own ears. Sometimes I'll see him looking at the car from the kitchen window and I feel a wave of guilt. He's not a bad man. He doesn't cheat. He doesn't drink. He's a provider. On paper, our life looks like a beautiful symphony. But when you're the one living it, you realize it's just a series of jarring, unfinished notes. I'm at a breaking point. I've started looking at apartments. I've started imagining a life where the only sounds I hear are the ones I choose to finish. Is that enough of a reason to break up a family? To tell my kids their father and I are over because he couldn't let a CD play through? People will think I'm shallow. My mother will think I'm losing my mind. But they don't understand that living with a chronic skipper is like living in a house with a leaking faucet that you can never ever turn off. It's the constant rhythmic interruption of your soul. I asked him one last time, just yesterday. I said, David, if I told you that our marriage depended on you never touching that skip button again, when we're together, could you do it? He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of real fear in his eyes. But then almost as if he couldn't help it, his eyes drifted toward his phone on the counter. A notification had lit up the screen. I can try, he whispered. But trying has been the soundtrack of our last 5 years, and I'm tired of waiting for the song to change. The decision to go to therapy was my last-ditch effort. I told myself that if a neutral third party, someone with a degree and a clinical perspective, couldn't make David see the gravity of what was happening, then I was truly done. I couldn't keep being the crazy wife who was obsessed with a minor habit. I needed someone else to look at him and say, this isn't just about music, this is about how you exist in the world. The drive to the therapist's office was the first real sign of how far apart we'd drifted. Usually for something this important, we would have gone together. We would have sat in one car, maybe held hands across the center console. But I couldn't do it. I drove my new car, the one I'd bought as a sanctuary, and he drove his. We pulled into the parking lot at the same time. 2 separate engines cutting out in unison, 2 separate silences in the air. He looked confused as he stepped out of his SUV. We could have just carpooled Sarah, he said, adjusting his coat. It seems like a waste of gas. I needed the space, David, I replied, not looking him in the eye. I needed to hear a full album on the way here. I needed to arrive feeling whole. He just sighed and shook his head, that familiar look of, there she goes again, washing over his face. We sat on a beige velvet sofa in a room that smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. Dr. Eris was a woman in her 50s with sharp, observant eyes. She didn't waste much time. She asked why we were there, and I laid it all out. I didn't hold back. I talked about the 10 years of unfinished melodies. I talked about our children feeling like their efforts were never enough to hold their father's attention. I talked about the car, the piano, and the phantom skipping. When I finished, the room was quiet. I waited for David to defend himself, but he did something worse. He chuckled. Dr. Eris, he said, leaning forward with that charming, easy smile that used to make me melt. I know it sounds a bit eccentric. I'm a high-energy person. I have a lot of passion for music, and sometimes I just get excited to share the next great thing. I didn't realize Sarah was taking it so personally. It's just Spotify. It's just a radio dial. It's not like I'm walking out on her in the middle of dinner. Dr. Eris didn't smile back. She scribbled something in her notebook and then looked at David. David, imagine for a moment that every time you sat down to eat a meal Sarah cooked for you, she waited until you were 3 bites in, and then she took the plate away and replaced it with a different dish. And then 3 bites into that one, she took it away again, over and over for 10 years. You'd never be full. You'd never be satisfied. You'd eventually stop wanting to eat at all. David blinked. The smile faltered. That's a bit of an exaggeration, don't you think? Is it? I cut in. Because that's exactly what it feels like. My soul is starving, David. I am living in a state of constant emotional malnutrition because you won't let a single moment reach its conclusion. The session went on for an hour, but it felt like a loop. Every time Dr. Eris tried to pin him down on the psychological why of his behavior, David would skip. He'd change the subject to how hard he works, or he'd pivot to a joke about his ADHD, or he'd suggest that maybe I was the one who was too rigid and couldn't handle change. He was doing it in the conversation, the very thing he did to the music. He couldn't stay on one emotional frequency long enough to actually feel the pain he was causing. We left the office feeling more disconnected than when we arrived. A few days later, the real breaking point came. It wasn't at home, and it wasn't even about our music. It was the school's winter recital. Our 7-year-old daughter Maya had been practicing a simple vocal piece for weeks. She's shy, unlike her brother, and she'd been terrified of standing on that stage. We had spent hours in her bedroom, her little voice trembling as she sang about snowflakes and winter winds. I had promised her over and over that we would be right there in the front row listening to every single note. The auditorium was packed. The smell of floor wax and damp coats filled the air. When it was Maya's turn, she walked out in her little velvet dress looking so small under the spotlights. She found our eyes in the crowd and gave a tiny nervous wave. I felt a surge of pride so strong it made my eyes sting. She started to sing. It was beautiful. Her voice was gaining strength with every line. She was doing it. She was conquering her fear. Then I felt a movement next to me. David had his phone out. At first I thought he was recording her. That would be normal, right? But he wasn't holding it up. He was holding it in his lap, his thumb dancing across the screen with that familiar, frantic energy. I glanced down. He was on a music blog. He was scrolling through top 10 new jazz releases. He wasn't even looking at his daughter. I leaned over and whispered, "David, put that away. Look at her." I am, he whispered back, not looking up. I just remembered I needed to check this one track before I forget. It'll only take a second. "David, she's singing now?" He looked up, gave a quick nod toward the stage, and then as if his thumb had a mind of its own, it went right back to the screen. He wasn't just skipping songs anymore. He was skipping his own life. He was skipping the milestones. He was skipping the memories that you can never get back. Maya finished her song. The audience erupted in applause. She looked directly at us, her face glowing with relief and triumph. I stood up clapping as hard as I could, tears streaming down my face. David stood up too, clapping with one hand while the other hand slid his phone back into his pocket. "She was great, wasn't she?" he said, already looking toward the exit. "Hey, do you think we can beat the traffic if we leave during the next kid's act? I've got this new playlist I want to show you in the car. It's got some really interesting transition techniques." I looked at him, and for the first time in 10 years, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel resentment. I felt a cold, hollow clarity. "Go ahead, David," I said quietly. "Wait, you're not coming?" "No, I'm staying for the whole thing. Every child, every song, every note. But it's going to take forever. We'll be stuck in the lot for 40 minutes. "I don't care," I said, my voice steady. "I'm staying until the very end. You go. Take your car. Go listen to your transitions." He looked at me confused, perhaps sensing for the first time that something had fundamentally shifted. "Are you sure? I mean, I can wait if you really wanna..." "I don't want you to wait, David. I want you to go. I think it's better if you just skip this part." He hesitated, then shrugged. "Okay, I'll see you at home then." He turned and walked out of the auditorium before the next performer even reached the microphone. I sat back down in my seat, the hard plastic cold against my back. I watched every single child. I listened to every off-key note, every stuttered lyric, every nervous pause. I stayed until the lights came up and the janitor started folding the chairs. When I finally walked out to my car, the parking lot was almost empty. The night air was freezing, but I felt strangely warm. I got into my car, started the engine, and didn't turn on the radio. I sat in the silence, real complete silence for a long time. I realized then that David wasn't ever going to change because he didn't think there was anything wrong with him. In his mind, he was a connoisseur of the next. He was an explorer of the better. He didn't see that by constantly seeking the peak of the next mountain, he was never actually standing on the ground of the one he was on. I drove home, and when I pulled into the driveway, I saw the light on in his studio. I could hear faint, muffled sounds of guitar, the start of a riff followed by a sudden stop, then a different riff, then silence, then a snippet of a song. I didn't go inside. I sat in my car and looked at our house, the house we'd built, the children we'd raised, the life we'd composed together. It was a beautiful song, I realized. Or it could have been, but he had skipped so many verses that the melody didn't make sense anymore. The bridge was missing, the chorus was fragmented, and the ending was coming whether he was ready for it or not. I reached into my glove box and pulled out a notebook and a pen. I didn't write a divorce petition. Not yet. I just wrote one sentence at the top of a blank page. I want to hear the end of the story. The morning after the recital felt different. Usually I woke up with a knot of anxiety in my stomach, wondering how many times I'd have to hear the first 30 seconds of a song before breakfast was over. But that morning, the knot was gone. In its place was a cold, hollow space. I moved through the kitchen like a ghost, making pancakes for the kids, listening to the rhythmic thwack of the spatula against the griddle. It was a complete sound. A beginning, a middle, and an end. David came down a few minutes later whistling a tune I didn't recognize, probably because he'd only heard the intro. He looked refreshed, energized, completely oblivious to the fact that the foundations of his world were cracking. He kissed the top of my head and reached for the Sonos controller on the counter. "Hey, I found this incredible Japanese jazz fusion track last night after you guys got home," he said, his thumb already hovering over the play button. "The way they use the minor fourth in the opening hook is..." "No," I said. He stopped his thumb, freezing an inch above the screen. No what? No music, David. Not today. I just want to hear the kids eat. I want to hear the birds outside. I want to hear the silence. He chuckled that dismissive, "Oh, you're just in a mood" laugh. Come on, Sarah. It's Saturday morning. We always have a soundtrack. It'll put us in a good mood. I am in a good mood. I lied, my voice flat. But I won't have it interrupted. If you turn that music on, David, and you skip even 1 second of it, I'm taking my plate and I'm going to sit in my car. He looked at me, then really looked at me. For a fleeting second, I saw a flicker of hesitation. He saw the new car mention as the threat it was. He set the controller down, but I could see his hand twitching. It was like watching someone try to hold their breath underwater. He sat down, took a bite of his pancakes, and for 3 minutes the house was quiet. But silence to David wasn't peace. It was a vacuum that needed to be filled. I could see him looking around the room, his eyes darting from the toaster to the window to the kids. He was looking for an exit, a way to jump to the next thing. "So Leo," David said, his voice a little too loud in the quiet kitchen, "that jazz piece you were working on, I was thinking we could totally rearrange the middle section, make it more of a bossa nova feel. It'd be much more current, you know?" Leo didn't even look up from his plate. He just pushed a piece of pancake through a puddle of syrup. "It's okay, Dad. I think I'm going to take a break from the piano for a while." The air left the room. David looked shocked. "A break? But you're so close to mastering that piece, you just need a little more." "I don't want to master it," Leo said, his voice small but firm. "What's the point? We never finish the songs anyway. It's like reading a book but only getting to chapter 3. Why bother?" David looked at me, his mouth open, looking for support. I just stared back at him. I wanted him to feel the weight of those words. I wanted him to see that his passion was actually a form of erasure. He was erasing our son's sense of accomplishment. He was erasing the joy of the journey. That's not true, buddy," David stammered. "We finished things. We went to the recital last night." "You didn't?" Maya piped up from across the table. Her voice was steady, the kind of blunt honesty that only a 7-year-old can deliver. "You left before the end. Mom stayed. You skipped the rest of the kids." David went pale. He looked at his hands, then at his phone, then back at his children. I could see the gears turning, the desperate search for a way to skip this uncomfortable conversation and move to a version of reality where he was still the cool musical dad. "I had a lot on my mind," he muttered. "I'm sorry, guys. I'll make it up to you. Tell you what, let's all go to the record store this afternoon. Everyone gets to pick one vinyl and we'll come home and listen to them. The whole way through, I promise." The kids looked at me, seeking permission. I nodded slowly. Part of me, the part that still loved the man he used to be, wanted to believe him. I wanted this to be the turning point. I wanted the record store trip to be the reset we so desperately needed. We went to the local shop, a place filled with the smell of dust and old paper. It was a haven for people who loved music, the kind of place where you were expected to linger. We spent an hour browsing the bins. Leo picked a classic Vince Guaraldi album. Maya picked a soundtrack from a movie she loved. I picked a solo piano album, something quiet and meditative. David picked a complex avant-garde experimental jazz record that looked like it had about 50 tracks on it. We got home and there was a sense of ceremony to it. We sat in the living room, the record player glowing softly. David let Leo go first. He carefully placed the needle on the vinyl. The warm crackle filled the room and the first notes of Linus and Lucy began to play. For the first 5 minutes it was perfect. David sat on the floor with the kids, his eyes closed, nodding along. I felt a tiny spark of hope. Maybe he can do it, I thought. Maybe he finally understands. But then the first song ended and the second one began. It was a slower, more contemplative track. David's eyes opened. He started looking at the back of the album cover. He started tapping his fingers on his knee, not to the beat, but with a frantic, uneven rhythm. "This one's a bit slow, isn't it?" he whispered to me. "I mean, it's classic, but the energy just dropped off a cliff." "David," I warned him, my voice low, like, "Don't. I'm just saying we could jump ahead to track 4. That one's got a much better groove. It would keep the kids engaged." "The kids are engaged," I said, pointing to Leo, who was staring at the spinning record with a look of pure fascination. David lasted another 2 minutes. Then he stood up. He didn't lift the needle, not yet, but he started pacing. He went to the kitchen and came back. He checked his watch. He looked at his phone. He was like a man trapped in a room with no oxygen. The physical manifestation of his discomfort was painful to watch. He wasn't enjoying the music. He was enduring it. When it was time for Maya's record, he couldn't even make it through the first song. "Oh, I know this one," he exclaimed, interrupting a beautiful vocal solo. "But have you heard the remix they did for the European release? It's got this incredible synth layer that really brings out the melody. Hold on, let me just find it on my phone so you can compare." "No, Dad!" Maya cried out, her eyes filling with tears. "I want to hear this one. This is the one I picked." "I know, honey, but this other version is it's better. You'll thank me, I promise. Just 30 seconds. Listen to the difference." He reached for the volume knob on the receiver, intending to mute the record and play the better version from his phone. I stood up. I didn't think. I didn't plan it. I just walked over, took his phone out of his hand, and walked straight to the kitchen. I opened the junk drawer, dropped the phone inside, and turned the key in the drawer lock, a lock we'd installed years ago to keep the kids out of the batteries and sharp things. "Sarah, what are you doing?" David asked, his voice rising in confusion and anger. "Give me my phone." "No," I said, leaning against the counter, my heart thumping in my chest. "We are finishing Maya's record. We are finishing my record, and then, and only then, will you get your phone back. You are going to sit in that room, and you are going to listen to every single note, and you are not going to say a single word about how something else is better. Do you understand?" He looked at me with pure, unadulterated shock. For the first time in our marriage, I had exerted total control over the skip. "You're being insane," he hissed, stepping toward me. "It's a phone, Sarah. It's just music. You're acting like a dictator." "I'm acting like a woman who wants to live a life that actually happens," I shouted, the dam finally breaking. "I'm acting like a mother who doesn't want her children to grow up thinking that nothing they love is ever enough for their father. Sit down, David." He sat through the rest of Maya's record. He sat through my piano album. But he didn't listen. He sat there with a look of stony cold resentment on his face. He stared at the wall. He refused to look at me. He refused to look at the kids. He was physically present, but he had checked out completely. He had skipped the emotional experience of being with his family out of spite because he couldn't skip the music. When the last record finally finished, I went to the drawer, unlocked it, and handed him his phone. He didn't say a word. He took the phone, grabbed his car keys, and walked out the front door. I heard his car engine roar to life. I heard the tires gravel as he pulled out of the driveway. And then, for the first time in a very long time, I heard nothing at all. I walked back into the living room. Leo and Maya were sitting on the sofa looking at me with wide, frightened eyes. "Is Dad coming back?" Maya whispered. "I don't know, honey," I said, sitting down between them and pulling them into my arms. "But for right now, let's just sit here together. Let's just finish the day." We sat there in the fading afternoon light, the three of us in a house that felt too big and too quiet. I realized then that I had won the battle. I had forced the completion of the songs, but I had lost the war. You can't force someone to want to stay. You can't force someone to value the now if they are already halfway to the next. I looked at the record player. The needle was still in the final groove, clicking rhythmically as the record spun in circles. Click, click, click. It was the sound of a story that had nowhere left to go. The hours that followed David's departure were the quietest I had ever known in that house. Usually there was always a hum, a refrigerator whirring a distant radio, the kids humming a tune. But that evening, it was as if the house itself had gone into shock. I fed the kids a simple dinner of cereal and toast, neither of them having much of an appetite. We didn't talk about what happened. We didn't talk about the locked drawer or the look on David's face. We just existed in the spaces between the sounds of our spoons hitting the bowls. I put them to bed early, lingering longer than usual in their rooms. I tucked the blankets tight around their shoulders as if I could shield them from the fragmentation of our family. When I finally walked back downstairs, the living room felt haunted. The record player was still there. The needle now lifted the dust cover down. It looked like an altar to a religion I no longer practiced. I sat on the sofa and waited. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't check my phone. I just sat in the dark, watching the headlights of passing cars sweep across the ceiling. Every time a pair of lights slowed down near our driveway, my heart would hitch a mixture of hope and pure, unadulterated dread. Did I want him to come home? Did I want him to walk through that door and apologize, truly apologize? Or did I want him to just keep driving until he found a song he actually wanted to finish? It was nearly 2 a.m. when I heard his car pull in. The engine didn't cut out right away. For 10 minutes, he just sat out there. I could hear the faint, muffled thumping of a bass line through the walls. He was out there in the driveway finishing a song. Or maybe he was skipping through 100 of them trying to find the one that would make him feel like he wasn't the villain in this story. When he finally came inside, he looked haggard. His hair was a mess and his eyes were red-rimmed. He didn't look at me. He went straight to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stood by the sink staring out at the dark backyard. "I drove all the way to the coast and back," he said, his voice raspy. "That's a long drive, David." "I listened to 3 full albums, Sarah. 3 of them. From start to finish, no skips. I even sat through the hidden tracks and the weird experimental outros." He said it like he was reporting a grueling marathon he'd just completed. Like he'd climbed Everest or rescued someone from a burning building. He wanted credit. He wanted me to tell him he was a good boy, that he'd done his chores, and that everything was fine now. And I asked, my voice cold, "How did it feel?" He turned around, leaning against the counter. "It felt like work, Sarah. It felt like I was being held hostage by my own car. I kept wanting to hear what was next. I kept thinking about that one bridge in that other song, or how this track reminded me of a different artist I wanted to check out. It was physically painful to just stay there." "That's because you're not listening to the music, David," I said, standing up and walking into the kitchen. "You're using it. You're using it to fill a hole in yourself that can never be filled. You're addicted to the rush of the transition. You're addicted to the new because you're terrified of the now. Because if you actually stay in the now, you might have to feel something real. You might have to realize that your life isn't a highlight reel. It's a long, slow, beautiful, and sometimes boring symphony that requires you to be present for the quiet parts too." He looked at me with a mixture of confusion and pity. You're making this so much bigger than it is. It's a habit. It's a quirk. I have a fast-paced brain. Why is that a grounds for divorce? Why is that a reason to break up our family? Because you're skipping us, David. I shouted, the volume of my voice surprising even me. You skipped the recital. You skipped Leo's pride in his music. You skip our conversations. You skip our intimacy. You are living your life in 30-second previews, and I am tired of being a guest star in a show that never actually airs. I'm trying, he yelled back, slamming his glass down on the counter. I went to the therapist. I listened to the records today. I'm trying to be what you want me to be. But it's like I'm never enough. No matter how much I listen, you're always waiting for the moment I fail. I'm not waiting for you to fail, David. I'm waiting for you to care. I'm waiting for you to look at Maya while she's singing and see her not just a moment you can optimize or a performance you can improve. I'm waiting for you to look at me and see a woman who is lonely in a house full of noise. He went silent then. He looked down at the floor, his shoulders sagging. For a moment, I thought I'd finally reached him. I thought the weight of my words had finally broken through that frantic buzzing barrier he kept around himself. I don't know if I can change the way my brain works, Sarah, he whispered. Then I don't know if I can stay, I replied. He looked up, and for the first time I saw the true depth of the divide between us. He didn't see a tragedy, he saw an inconvenience. He saw a wife who was being difficult about something he considered trivial. He truly fundamentally did not believe that his behavior was a form of emotional neglect. To him, the music was just background noise to his own internal monologue, and to him, I was starting to become background noise too. He stayed on the couch that night. I went upstairs and lay in our bed, the space beside me feeling like a vast empty canyon. I thought about all the songs we'd started together. I thought about the way we used to harmonize in that practice room, how we used to linger on the notes, letting the vibrations fade into the air until they were truly gone. Where did that couple go? When did the music stop being something we shared and start being something he curated? I realized then that the skip wasn't just a habit, it was a philosophy. David lived his life in the future. He was always looking for the next job, the next car, the next house, the next song. He was a man who couldn't enjoy a meal because he was already thinking about dessert. He couldn't enjoy a vacation because he was already planning the next one. And he couldn't enjoy a marriage because he was always looking for the better version of a moment that was happening right in front of him. The next morning, the fix arrived, or at least David's version of one. I came downstairs to find him sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open and a stack of colorful sticky notes. He looked up, a manic sort of excitement in his eyes, the same look he gets when he finds a new playlist. Okay, look, he said, gesturing to the screen. I've been up all night thinking. I've come up with a system. We're going to have no skip zones. I've mapped out the house. The living room and the car are no skip zones. I've even created a shared digital token system. Every time I listen to a full song with you, I get a token. After 10 tokens, I get to, pick the movie for Friday night. It's like a gamified version of mindfulness. We can track it on this app I found. I stared at the screen at the colorful charts and the token icons. I felt a wave of nausea. David, I said, my voice barely a whisper, you want me to give you a gold star for not ignoring your family? No, it's about building new neural pathways. It's about positive reinforcement. If we make it a game, it'll be easier for me to focus. It'll make it fun for the kids too. They love apps. I looked at him and I realized that he was already skipping the hard work of actual emotional change. He was looking for a shortcut. He was looking for a better way to be a husband that didn't involve actually having to feel the discomfort of being present. He wanted a system to replace the soul. I can't do this, David, I said, turning away from the laptop. What? Why not? It's a great system. It solves the problem. It doesn't solve the problem, David. It is the problem. You're still looking for the next thing. You're looking for the token. You're looking for the reward. You're still not just being here with us. You're turning our marriage into a performance review. I walked out of the kitchen and into the hallway. I looked at the piano in the alcove. I hadn't touched it in months. I walked over to it, sat down on the bench, and lifted the lid. The keys were cool beneath my fingers. I didn't think about what I was going to play. I just let my hands find the chords. I started to play a piece I'd written when we were first engaged. It was a long, complex melody full of shifts and changes, but it always returned to the same haunting theme. It was a song about building a life. It was a song about the beauty of the long haul. I heard David walk into the room. I felt him standing behind me. I waited for the interruption. I waited for the, oh, try it in a minor key, or the listen to this other bridge I thought of. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I was playing for my life, playing to see if he could let me finish just this one thing. I reached the middle of the song. I reached the part where the melody usually breaks and transforms. I took a deep breath and kept playing. And then I felt his hand on my shoulder. That's beautiful, Sarah, he whispered. My heart soared for a millisecond. But you know, he continued, his voice dropping into that familiar, helpful tone, if you used a sustain pedal on that third measure, it would really help the transition into the next movement. Actually, wait, I have a recording of a guy doing something similar on a Rhodes piano. Let me just find it. It's much more evocative. He reached into his pocket. I stopped playing. I didn't even finish the measure. I just let my hands fall into my lap. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was final. It was the sound of a song that would never, ever be finished. I stood up, closed the piano lid with a gentle, terrifying finality, and looked him right in the eyes. "Keep the tokens, David," I said. "I'm going to go pack." I walked past him without a second glance. My feet felt heavy on the stairs, each step echoing through the house like a slow, deliberate drumbeat. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps quick and frantic, his voice a flurry of words that I was already starting to tune out. He was doing it again, skipping the reality of the moment, trying to fast forward to the part where I'd calmed down and we were laughing about this over a better dinner. "Sarah, wait, you're being impulsive," he called out, his voice trailing me into our bedroom. "We haven't even tried the system. You can't just quit because I made one suggestion. It's a process. Remember, a transition." I didn't answer. I pulled my large floral suitcase out from under the bed. The sound of the zipper was sharp and final. I started pulling clothes from the dresser, random shirts, jeans, sweaters, not even bothering to fold them. I just needed to fill the space. I needed to create a physical barrier between my old life and whatever was coming next. "What are you even doing?" David asked, standing in the doorway, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "Where are you going to go? To your mother's? She'll think you've lost your mind. She loves me. She thinks our musical life is charming." "She doesn't live it, David," I said, finally looking up. "She hears the highlight reel. She sees the 30-second clips you post on Instagram. She doesn't hear the silence that follows every time you cut me off. She doesn't feel the erosion of her own voice." I kept packing. Every item I threw into the bag felt like a word I was reclaiming. My favorite wool socks, the book I'd been trying to finish for 3 months, the sheet music for the piece I'd just stopped playing. David watched me, his expression shifting from annoyance to a burgeoning, desperate panic. He was finally starting to realize that he couldn't skip this scene. This wasn't a transition, it was the finale. Suddenly he turned and ran back downstairs. I heard him rummaging through the living room, the sound of drawers opening and closing, the clatter of record sleeves. A minute later he was back breathless, holding a small dusty wooden box. "Look," he said, thrusting it toward me. "Look at this. Do you remember?" I stopped. I knew that box. It was where we kept the cassette tapes from our college days. The raw, unedited recordings of our first practice sessions. The moments before we had high-end gear, before he had a 1,000-song playlist in his pocket. "I found the tape of our first performance," he said, his voice trembling. "The one where we played for 3 hours at that dive bar. We didn't skip a single note then, Sarah. We were in sync. We were a duo. Let's listen to it, right now. Just you and me. I won't touch the buttons, I swear. I'll just sit here, and we'll listen to the whole thing." It was a classic David move, a grand nostalgic gesture designed to reset the emotional clock. He wanted to use the better past to overwrite the miserable present. "David," I said, my heart breaking all over again, "that tape is 20 years old. You can't live on a loop. You can't keep pulling out the best hits to avoid the fact that the current track is broken." "It's not broken. It's just a rough patch." I zipped the suitcase. The sound was like a guillotine. "I'm going to stay at an Airbnb for a few days," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I need to hear my own thoughts without you trying to remix them. I need to know what a full day feels like when it isn't being cut into pieces." I walked toward the door, but he blocked my path. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. The bravado, the curator, energy, the restless buzzing, it was all gone, replaced by a raw, naked fear. "What do I tell the kids?" he whispered. "Tell them the truth, David. Tell them that Mom needs to finish her song." I pushed past him and went to the kids' rooms. This was the hardest part. How do you explain to a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old that their world is changing because of something as seemingly small as a skip button? How do you explain that? Their father's passion was actually a wall. Leo was sitting on his bed, his headphones on, staring out the window. He took them off when I walked in, his expression guarded. He saw the suitcase in the hallway. "Are you leaving because of the piano?" he asked. "No, honey," I said, sitting beside him. "I'm leaving because I need to find a place where we can all finish what we start. I need a place where your music and mine and Maya's is the most important thing in the room." "Is Dad coming?" "Not right now. Dad needs to learn how to listen." Leo nodded slowly. To my surprise, he didn't cry. He just looked at me with a wisdom that no 9-year-old should have. "He does that with my games too," Leo said quietly. "He always wants to show me the better level before I finish the one I'm on. I stopped playing with him a long time ago." It was another knife to my heart. My son had been emotionally distancing himself from his father for years, and I had been so wrapped up in my own resentment that I hadn't even seen the full extent of the damage. David wasn't just skipping songs, he was skipping his children's childhoods. I kissed them both goodbye, promising I'd call them every night, promising that this wasn't their fault. Maya cried, clutching her stuffed rabbit, while David stood in the hallway looking like a ghost in his own home. He didn't try to stop me again. He just watched as I carried my bags down the stairs, past the silent piano, and out to my car. The drive to the rental was the strangest experience of my life. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't connect my phone. I just drove in the natural soundtrack of the world, the hum of the tires on the asphalt, the rhythmic click of the turn signal, the muffled sound of the wind. It was a complete unbroken experience. When I arrived at the small apartment, I didn't unpack. I just sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the silence. It wasn't the empty silence that David feared. It was a full silence. It was a silence that held the possibility of a beginning. An hour later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from David. "I'm sitting in the living room. I put on your favorite album. The one by Satie. I'm on track 3. I'm not skipping. I promise." I looked at the message and for a second I felt that old pull, the desire to believe, the hope that this time would be different. But then I looked at the timestamp. The message had been sent 5 minutes ago. The album he mentioned had tracks that were only 2 minutes long. If he was on track 3, he'd already been sitting there for 6 minutes. I waited. 10 minutes passed. 20, 30. 20, 30. Then another text. I had to turn it off. It was too quiet. I started thinking about that one melody you played today, and I wanted to find a version of it that wasn't so sad. I'm sorry, Sarah. I'm trying, but the silence is too loud. I didn't reply. I turned off my phone, laid back on the bed, and let the quiet wash over me. I realized that David wasn't trying to change for me or for the kids or even for himself. He was trying to fix the discomfort of being alone with his own mind. And until he could do that, there would never be enough music in the world to satisfy him. I stayed in that apartment for a week. I went to work, I saw the kids for dinner, and I played the piano at a local community center. I played the same piece over and over from the very first note to the very last. I let the final chord ring out until the strings stopped vibrating. I let the air become still. Every night, David sent me a report. Listened to 4 songs today. Only skipped the outros. Found a new artist you'd love, but I'm saving it for when you come home. The house is too quiet. The kids are too quiet. He was treating our separation like a training montage in a movie. He was waiting for the better version of our marriage to start. He didn't realize that I didn't want a better version. I just wanted the real one. By the end of the week, I knew what I had to do. I went back to the house on a Sunday afternoon. The kids were at a birthday party and David was in the garage. I could hear the familiar sound of his guitar, a riff, a stop, a different riff, a stop. I walked in and stood by the workbench. He looked up, his eyes lighting up with a hope that made me feel sick. "You're back," he said, dropping his pick. "I've been practicing Sarah. Look, I've got a list. Every song I've listened to in full this week, I've got 42 entries." He held up a piece of paper covered in his frantic, messy handwriting. It looked like a manifesto. It looked like a cry for help. "David," I said, my voice soft, "I didn't come back to check your homework." "Then why are you staying? I moved the Sonos controller. It's in the top cabinet. I'm using a timer now." "I'm here to talk about the house," I said, "and the kids, and how we're going to tell them that we're getting a legal separation." The paper in his hand fluttered to the floor. The better version of his life had just been skipped. The silence that followed the word separation was different from any other silence we'd ever shared. It wasn't the peaceful pause between movements or the breathless quiet after a climax. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, the kind that feels like the air has been sucked out of the room. David stood there, his hand still hovering near his guitar, looking at me as if I had just spoken in a language he didn't understand. The list of songs he'd completed lay on the oily garage floor, a pathetic testament to a struggle he shouldn't even have had to fight. "Separation," he whispered, the word catching in his throat. "Sarah, look at me. We're the musical couple. We're David and Sarah. We have the house, the kids, the life. You're telling me you're gonna blow all of that up because I'm a bit restless with a remote control." "It's not about the remote, David," I said, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to stay composed. "It's about the fact that you are never, ever truly here. You're always 3 minutes ahead of us. You're always looking for the better melody, the better chord, the better version of the moment we're actually living. I've spent 10 years feeling like a placeholder. I've spent 10 years waiting for you to finish a conversation, a song a night in bed, without looking for an exit." He took a step toward me, his face contorted with a mixture of rage and desperation. "I have ADHD, Sarah. You know that my brain works differently. I'm wired for novelty. I thought you loved that about me. You used to say my energy was infectious. You used to say I made life feel like an adventure." "An adventure has a destination, David," I countered. "What we have is just a series of frantic starts. You're like a person who reads the first page of 1,000 books and thinks they're well read. You don't know how the stories end. You don't know how our story ends because you've been skipping the chapters that aren't exciting enough for you." He slumped back against his workbench, knocking over a tin of guitar picks that scattered across the floor with a sharp metallic ring. He didn't move to pick them up. For the first time, he didn't try to fix the sound. He just let the mess be. "What do we tell people?" he asked, his voice hollow. "When they ask why we broke up, what are you going to say? Oh, he skipped too many songs on Spotify? You'll be a laughingstock, Sarah. People will think you're insane." "I don't care what people think," I said, and for the first time in years, I realized I meant it. I care about how I feel when I wake up in the morning. I care about the fact that our son has stopped playing the piano because he doesn't think his music is worth finishing. I care that our daughter thinks her father's phone is more interesting than her voice. If the world thinks I'm crazy for wanting a life that actually reaches the final chorus, then let them laugh. At least I'll be able to hear them. The conversation moved from the garage to the kitchen and then to the living room, the scene of so many interrupted melodies. We talked for hours, but it felt like we were circling the same drain. David fluctuated between pleading and lashing out. He offered to go to more therapy, to get a different medication, to throw away his phone entirely. He was willing to do anything except the one thing I actually needed to fundamentally value the present moment over the imagined one. At one point, he sat down at the piano, my piano. He started to play. It was a song he'd written for me when we were expecting Leo. It was a beautiful, simple melody that always used to make me cry. He played the first verse, his eyes locked on mine, searching for that spark of connection. He played the chorus. He was doing it. He was staying with it. But as he reached the bridge, I saw it. I saw the slight flicker in his eyes. I saw his fingers hesitate, his brain already calculating a better way to transition into the final section. He wanted to show me he'd changed, but he was still performative. He was enduring the song to prove a point rather than living in the music. He finished the song. He hit the final chord and held at the sustain pedal, echoing through the room. "There," he said, breathless. "I finished it. See, I can do it." "You didn't finish it for the music, David?" I said, my heart feeling like lead. "You finished it as a transaction. You were counting the seconds until it was over. I could see it in your face. You were waiting for the reward of being done." He let out a frustrated groan and slammed his hands onto the keys, a jarring, dissonant crash that made me flinch. "Nothing I do is ever enough for you. I play the song and you tell me I didn't play it right. I stay in the room and you tell me I'm not present enough. You're moving the goalposts, Sarah." "The goalposts are where they've always been, David. At the end of the song." We spent the rest of the evening discussing logistics. We decided he would stay in the house for the time being, mostly for the kids, and I would find a longer-term rental. We talked about schedules, about piano lessons, about how to handle the musical household reputation we'd built. It was cold and clinical. It was the most finished conversation we'd had in a decade, and it was the most painful. As I was packing my final bag, I found a small digital recorder tucked in the back of the junk drawer. It was an old one, the kind we used to use to catch song ideas before smartphones were a thing. I hesitated, then pressed play. A voice came through the tiny tinny speaker. It was David's voice from years ago. He was laughing. "Okay, Sarah, listen to this," his younger self said. "I've got this riff. It's not perfect yet, but it's got something. Don't let me stop. Okay, just keep playing the rhythm and let's see where it goes." Then I heard my own voice, younger and lighter. "I won't let you stop, David. Let's just see it through." And then the music started. It was messy. It was unpolished. There were missed notes and awkward transitions. But on that recording we played for 15 minutes straight. We didn't skip. We didn't look for the better version. We just explored the one we were in. I sat on the floor and listened to that 15-minute recording from start to finish. I cried for the woman I used to be, the one who thought she could keep him from stopping. And I cried for the man he used to be, the one who was actually interested in where the music went rather than just how it started. When the recording ended, there was a long stretch of static, then silence. I realized then that David hadn't changed into a skipper. He had always been one. I had just been better at holding the rhythm back then. I had been his anchor, his sustain pedal. But over 10 years, the weight of holding him in the now had exhausted me. I couldn't be the one responsible for his attention span anymore. I wanted to be a partner, not a handler. I left the recorder on the kitchen island with a note that simply said, "We used to know how to finish." I walked out to my car. The sun was setting, casting long orange shadows across the driveway. David was standing in the window, his phone in his hand, probably already looking for a podcast to drown out the sound of my tires on the gravel. As I drove away, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I turned on the radio. I found a station playing a long, slow blues track. I rolled down the windows and let the cool evening air fill the car. I didn't look at the clock. I didn't think about what was playing next. I just let the music exist. When the song ended, the DJ didn't speak right away. There were a few seconds of dead air, the kind of silence that David would have found intolerable, but to me it was the most beautiful sound in the world. It was the sound of something that had been fully realized. It was the sound of a conclusion. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if David will ever truly understand why I left. I don't know how we're going to navigate the shared custody of two children who have been raised in a house of fragments. But as I pulled into the parking lot of my new apartment, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in a decade. I got out of the car, locked the door, and walked toward my new life. I wasn't rushing. I wasn't looking for the better version of the next 5 minutes. I was just walking. One step, then the next, a beginning, a middle, and for the first time in a long time, the promise of a real end. The first month in my new apartment was a sensory revelation. It wasn't just the quiet, it was the quality of the sound. In the old house, the air always felt pressurized as if it were vibrating with the kinetic energy of David's restless thumb. Their silence was just a precursor to an interruption, but in this small sun-drenched space on the third floor of an old brick building, the silence felt thick and nourishing. It was like a canvas waiting for a brushstroke rather than a void waiting to be filled. I bought a small upright piano. It was nothing fancy, a well-loved Yamaha with a few scuffs on the wood and a middle C that was slightly out of tune. But when I sat down out of it for the first time, I felt a wave of relief so profound, it made my hands shake. I didn't play anything complex. I just pressed down on a single G major chord and held the sustain pedal. I listened as the notes bloomed harmonized and then slowly, agonizingly faded into nothingness. I let the sound die completely before I played the next one. No one was coming to suggest a different key. No one was reaching for a phone to show me a better version of a chord I was already feeling. The kids' first visit was the true test. I was terrified that they would find the apartment too quiet, too small, or too empty, compared to the high-octane musical theater of their father's house. I had set up a small record player in the corner and I let them pick a song from the meager collection I'd started. Leo picked a classical piano piece, something he would never have dared to play at home because it was too slow for David's taste. As the music began to play, I watched him. At first, he was tense. His eyes kept darting to the door and his hands were clenched in his lap. He was waiting for the skip. He was waiting for the, "Hey buddy, check this out" instead. But the skip never came. We sat there for 6 minutes. 6 full minutes of delicate, intricate piano. When the track ended, Leo let out a long, shaky breath. He looked at me, and for the first time in months, I saw the light back in his eyes. "We finished it, Mom," he whispered. "We actually finished the whole thing." "We're always going to finish the whole thing here, Leo," I promised him. Later that afternoon, Maya sat at my new piano. She started to sing a song she'd written at school. It was a simple, repetitive melody, the kind of thing that would have driven David into a curating frenzy within 30 seconds. She sang through the first verse, her voice small and tentative. She reached the bridge and she made a mistake. She hit a flat note and stopped, her face flushing with embarrassment. In the old house, that would have been the moment David stepped in. "Hey, try this note instead. It's more interesting," he would have said, effectively killing her creative impulse in the name of improvement. But I didn't say a word. I just sat on the sofa and waited. I let the silence hang in the air, giving her the space to breathe, to think, to find her own way back. After a long 10 seconds, Maya took a deep breath, found the right note on the keys, and kept going. She finished the song, her voice growing stronger with every line. When she reached the final "thank you" she'd added at the end, she beamed. She had completed something on her own terms. She hadn't been optimized. She'd just been heard. David, meanwhile, was struggling. He sent me videos of himself sitting in a dark room listening to whole albums. He sent me spreadsheets of no-skip sessions he'd completed with a timer. He was treating his presence in his own life like a CrossFit routine, something to be measured, logged, and reported for a reward. He didn't understand that by turning listening into a chore, he was still skipping the actual experience. He was still waiting for the done part so he could move on to the I did it part. He called me one night sounding more frantic than ever. "Sarah, I've been doing it. I've been listening, but it's not working. The house is so quiet, it feels like it's screaming. I can't stop thinking about all the music I'm missing out on while I'm stuck in one song. How do you do it? How do you just stay there?" "You stay there because you love what's happening in the moment more than the idea of what might happen next." "David," I said, "you stay there because the person you're with is more important than the playlist in your pocket." "But what if the next thing is better?" he cried out, his voice cracking. "What if I'm wasting my life on a mediocre melody when there's a masterpiece just one click away?" "Then you'll spend your whole life chasing masterpieces and never actually hearing a single note," I replied. "A masterpiece isn't a 30-second clip, David. It's the whole journey. It's the parts that are slow and the parts that are boring and the parts that hurt. If you skip those, you didn't hear the masterpiece. You just heard a trailer for one." He went quiet. I could hear his heavy breathing on the other end of the line. I knew he wanted to skip this conversation. I knew he wanted to hang up and find a song that would make him feel inspired again, rather than feeling the cold, hard weight of his own choices. "I don't think I can do it, Sarah," he finally whispered. "I don't think I'm built for the end of the song." "I know," I said, a tear finally escaping and rolling down my cheek, "and that's why I can't be built into your life anymore." We hung up, and for the first time I didn't feel the need to check my phone or see if he was calling back. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city lights. Each light represented a life, a story, a song being played out in real time. Some were fast, some were slow, some were discordant, and some were beautiful. But they were all happening. I realized then that the skip habit was just a symptom of a much larger tragedy, the refusal to be a witness to one's own life. David was so obsessed with the next that he was effectively erasing himself from the now. He was a man who was already at his own funeral, wondering what the playlist for the wake was going to be. I sat back down at the piano. I didn't play for him, or for the kids, or for the ghost of the marriage we'd lost. I played for me. I played a long, slow winding piece that felt like a river. I didn't rush. I didn't look for a better key. I just followed the melody wherever it wanted to go, and when I finally reached the end, I sat in the silence for a long, long time. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. The first person I had to tell besides David was my mother. I dreaded that call more than the actual moving out. My mother is a woman of the old school, someone who believes that marriage is a marathon of endurance, not a sprint for happiness. To her, divorce was reserved for the big things, infidelity, gambling, or a hidden second family. The idea that I was leaving a good man because of a bad habit was something I knew she would never truly wrap her head around. I sat on my new, slightly mismatched sofa, the phone feeling like a lead weight in my hand. When she finally picked up, her voice was full of that effortless warmth that usually made me feel safe. But today it just made me feel like an outsider. "Sarah, honey, how are the kids? How's David? I saw that video he posted of Leo playing such a talented boy just like his father." I took a deep breath, looking at the bare walls of my living room. "Mom, David and I are separating. I've moved into an apartment." The silence on the other end wasn't the peaceful kind I'd been cultivating. It was a stunned, judgmental vacuum. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost its warmth. "Separating? For heaven's sake, why did he do something? Is there someone else?" "No, Mom, there isn't anyone else. It's about the music. It's about the skipping. I can't live in a house where nothing ever finishes. I can't live with someone who isn't actually there." I heard her let out a sharp, frustrated sigh. Sarah, you're 35 years old. You have 2 children. You're telling me you're breaking up a home because of a Spotify button? Have you completely lost your mind? People deal with real problems, Sarah. They deal with debt and sickness and anger. David is a provider. He's a talented man, so he's a bit restless. So what? Everyone has quirks. You're being incredibly selfish. It's not a quirk, Mom. It's an erosion. It's like living in a room where someone is constantly flicking the light switch on and off. Eventually, you just want to sit in the dark. You're making a mistake, she snapped. A huge dramatic mistake. You're going to be alone sitting in your quiet apartment, and you're going to realize that a full song isn't worth a broken family. Mark my words. She hung up, and for a moment the silence of the apartment felt heavy. The crazy wife label was already being pinned to my chest. I knew my friends were probably saying the same thing in their private group chats. Did you hear about Sarah? Yes, she left him because he changes the radio too much. Can you believe it? Some people just don't know how good they have it. But they didn't see the lawyer's office. They didn't see the look on my attorney's face when I had to explain the irreconcilable differences. Mr. Henderson was a man who looked like he'd seen every possible way a human being could hurt another. He'd handled messy custody battles, hidden offshore accounts, and bitter disputes over antique silverware. He sat behind a massive mahogany desk, peering at me over his spectacles as I tried to articulate why a 3-minute song was the hill I was willing to die on. So, Mrs. Miller, he said, tapping a gold fountain pen against a legal pad, to be clear, there is no history of physical abuse, no substance issues, no financial impropriety. No, I said, my voice small. And you're stating that the primary cause of the breakdown is chronic interruption. It's psychological, Mr. Henderson. It's a complete lack of presence. It's a refusal to participate in the shared reality of our family. He doesn't just skip songs. He skips life. He skips milestones. He skips the emotional labor of finishing what he starts. Mr. Henderson leaned back, the leather of his chair creaking. He didn't laugh. He didn't roll his eyes. He just looked at me with a tired sort of empathy. In this business, we see a lot of explosions. People who burn their lives down in a single night of bad decisions. But more often what we see is erosion. Small repetitive actions that wear a person down until there's nothing left to hold on to. You're not the first person to leave because of a small thing, Mrs. Miller. Usually the small thing is just the only thing left that you can put a name to. He began to draft the papers, and seeing it in black and white, the cold clinical language of a legal separation felt like a physical blow. But even then, I didn't want to go back. I'd rather be the crazy woman in a quiet room than the sane wife in a house of fragments. The true difficulty, however, wasn't the lawyers or the mothers. It was the kids coming back from their first full weekend at David's house. When they walked into my apartment on Sunday evening, they looked vibrated. That's the only way I can describe it. They were hyper talking over each other in rapid fire bursts, their eyes wide and restless. It was as if they'd spent 48 hours in a blender. "Dad took us to the arcade," Maya shouted, jumping up and down. "But we only stayed for 10 minutes because he said the music in there was trash and he wanted to show us this cool new VR place. But then the VR place had a line, so we went to get tacos, but the taco place didn't have the right hot sauce, so we went to—" "Slow down, Maya," I said, putting a hand on her shoulder. Her skin felt hot. She was overstimulated to the point of exhaustion. Leo was even worse. He went straight to his room and put on his noise-canceling headphones without saying a word. When I went in to check on him later, he was just sitting on his bed, staring at the wall. "How was it, Leo?" I asked softly. He took off the headphones, looking at me with a weary expression. "It was loud, Mom. It was just always loud. Dad kept trying to show us the best things. The best movie scene, the best new game, the best song. But we never got past the first 5 minutes of anything. I feel like my brain is full of static." He looked at his hands, then at me. "I don't think Dad knows how to just be. He acts like if he stops moving, he'll disappear." That was the most profound thing anyone had ever said about David. He wasn't just a skipper out of habit. He was a skipper out of fear. He was terrified of the silence because in the silence you have to face yourself. In the silence you have to hear the echoes of your own choices. He kept the music moving, kept the scenes changing, kept the novelty coming because he was running away from the reality of his own life. I realized then that David wasn't a villain. He was a man with a hole in his soul that he was trying to fill with 30-second snippets of better things. But you can't build a house out of snippets. You can't build a marriage out of intros. That night after the kids were finally asleep, I sat on my balcony and looked out at the city. I thought about the 10 years I'd spent trying to be the anchor for a man who didn't want to be moored. I thought about the songs I'd started and never finished the thoughts I'd had that had been cut off mid-sentence, the person I had become, a woman who was constantly bracing for the interruption. I pulled out my phone. I had 34 unread messages from David. They were all links. Links to songs, links to articles about musical ADHD, links to new apps for couples productivity. He was still trying to optimize his way back into my life. He was still looking for the shortcut. I didn't open a single one of them. I just deleted the thread. Then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I opened a voice memo app. I hit record. I didn't play an instrument. I didn't sing a song. I just sat there. I recorded the sound of the wind in the trees, the distant hum of traffic, the rhythmic sound of my own breathing. I let the recording run for 10 minutes. No skips, no edits, no better versions. When I stopped the recording, I felt a sense of power I couldn't explain. I had reclaimed 10 minutes of my own life. I had allowed 10 minutes to simply be. I sent the recording to David, no caption, no explanation, just 10 minutes of silence, and the world as it actually was. He replied almost instantly. I don't get it. There's nothing on this. Is your phone broken? I didn't reply. I just put the phone down and watched the moon rise over the buildings. It was a slow, beautiful, unskippable process. The mediation meeting took place in a sterile office building downtown. It was one of those glass and steel structures where the air always feels recycled and the light is perpetually gray. I arrived 20 minutes early, not because I was anxious, but because I wanted to sit in the lobby and just be. I watched the people coming and going, businessmen checking their watches, couriers rushing with envelopes, and for the first time in 10 years, I didn't feel the need to join the race. I was happy to be the one sitting still. When David walked in, he looked like a man who hadn't slept in a month. He was wearing a suit that was slightly too big for him now, and his eyes were darting around the lobby as if he were looking for a hidden camera or a quick exit. He saw me, and for a second, I saw the man I had fallen in love with, the one who looked at me as if I were the only melody in the world. But then, almost reflexively, he pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and the moment was gone. He was already checking the next thing. We sat across from each other at a long, polished table. The mediator, a soft-spoken man named Marcus, began to lay out the terms of our shared custody and the division of our assets. It was a strange, disorienting experience to hear our entire life reduced to a series of percentages and line items. The house, the retirement accounts, the piano, the guitars. Regarding the musical equipment, Marcus said, looking over his notes, Mrs. Miller has requested the upright piano, while Mr. Miller will retain the studio equipment and the guitar collection. Is that correct? David cleared his throat. Actually, I was thinking. I found this new high-end digital interface. It's got a much faster processing speed than the one we have. I was thinking we could sell the old studio gear and split the profit so I can upgrade. It'll make my recording so much cleaner. It's got this new AI-driven mastering tool that... David! I said, my voice cutting through his technical jargon like a knife. We are here to talk about our children's futures, not your equipment upgrades. He stopped, his mouth hanging open slightly. I know that, Sarah. I'm just saying if I'm going to be recording music for the kids to listen to at my house, it should be the best version possible, right? I want them to have a high-quality experience. They don't want a high-quality experience, David, I said, leaning forward. They want a complete one. They want you to sit on the floor and listen to a nursery rhyme without checking your email. They want you to hear the end of their stories. David looked at the mediator, then back at me. I could see the frustration bubbling under the surface. He truly felt like the victim here. He felt like he was being punished for his standards, for his vision. He couldn't see that his vision was so narrow it only had room for the next 30 seconds. The meeting dragged on for 3 hours. Every time we reached a point of agreement, David would try to tweak it. He wanted to adjust the pickup times by 15 minutes to account for a better traffic flow he'd researched. He wanted to change the weekend rotation to align with a local concert series he thought the kids should experience in small curated bursts. He was trying to remix our divorce. By the end of it, I was exhausted. I signed the preliminary papers with a shaking hand. David signed his, but he spent 5 minutes looking for a better pen in his briefcase, before finally using the one Marcus offered him. Even in the act of signing away his marriage, he was looking for a minor improvement. As we walked out to the elevators, David caught my arm. Sarah, wait, just one thing. I stopped and looked at him. I listened to that recording you sent me, he said, his voice low. The 10 minutes of whatever that was. And... I don't understand why you're doing this to me. I'm a good man. I don't cheat. I don't drink. I'm a great musician. People would kill to have the life we had. And you're throwing it away for 10 minutes of silence? You're choosing a void over a symphony? It wasn't a void, David, I said, feeling a strange sense of pity for him. It was the world. It was the sound of things actually happening. You call it a symphony, but a symphony has movements. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. What we had wasn't a symphony. It was a car crash of intros. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. I stepped inside and turned around to face him. He stayed in the hallway, his phone already in his hand, his thumb hovering over the screen. I hope you find the song you're looking for, David, I said, but I'm finished being the one you skip. The doors closed, and for the first time in a decade, I felt like the floor beneath me was solid. The weeks that followed were a blur of transition. I helped the kids settle into a routine between the two homes. At my place, we had listening hours, not as a rule, but as a ritual. We'd pick an album, turn off the lights, and just lie on the floor. We'd talk about how the music made us feel, or we'd say nothing at all. Leo started playing the piano again. He didn't practice for hours, he just played until he was done. And I, for the first time in my life, didn't feel the need to fix his tempo or suggest a better ending. I started seeing a therapist of my own, not a marriage counselor, but someone just for me. Dr. Sterling was a quiet man who spent more time listening than talking. In our first few sessions, I found myself talking at 100 miles an hour, trying to fill every second of our hour, terrified of the silence. I was so used to being interrupted that I had developed a habit of rushing my own thoughts. "Sarah," Dr. Sterling said during our fourth session, "I'm not going to interrupt you. You have 45 minutes left. You don't have to finish the whole story in the next 30 seconds. I stopped. I felt a lump in my throat. I sat back in the chair and let out a long, shaky breath. "I don't know how to do that," I admitted. "I don't know how to just take my time." "Then let's practice," he said. "Let's just sit here for 3 minutes, no talking, no next thought, just 3 minutes of being in this room." It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. For the first 60 seconds, my brain was screaming. I was thinking about the laundry, the kids' school lunches, the legal papers, the song I'd heard on the radio that morning. I wanted to check my watch. I wanted to adjust my position. I wanted to skip the discomfort. But then something happened. I started to notice the sound of the clock ticking on the wall. I noticed the way the sunlight hit the dust motes in the air. I noticed the rhythm of my own heart. The discomfort didn't go away, but it became manageable. It became part of the experience. When the 3 minutes were up, I felt like I had just finished a marathon. I was crying, but it wasn't a sad cry. It was a cry of relief. I was finally truly in the room. I realized then that my marriage hadn't just been about David skipping. It had been about my own inability to protect my peace. I had allowed his restlessness to become my reality. I had spent 10 years trying to finish for both of us, and in the process, I had lost the ability to simply be. I started going back to the local community center to play the piano. I didn't play for an audience. I played for the empty hall. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, I was halfway through a piece when I saw a figure standing in the doorway. It was David. He looked different. He wasn't wearing a suit, and he didn't have his phone out. He just stood there, his hands in his pockets, listening. I didn't stop. I didn't acknowledge him. I just kept playing. I reached the part where I would usually wait for him to interrupt the part where the melody hangs in the air waiting for a transition. I let the silence stretch out. I let it be uncomfortable. David didn't move. He didn't speak. He just waited. I finished the piece. I hit the final chord and let it ring until it was a ghost of a sound. Then I turned around on the bench. "That was the whole song," David said quietly. "Yes, it was. I've been going to a new group. For people with impulsivity issues, it's not just about the music, Sarah. I'm starting to see that now. It's about the fact that I'm afraid of what happens when the music stops." "What do you think happens?" I asked. I think I'm afraid that if the music stops, I'll realize that I'm not as special as I think I am. That I'm just a guy sitting in a room, and that guy is lonely." It was the most honest thing he'd ever said. For a second, I felt that old urge to go to him, to comfort him, to tell him that he was special and that I could help him fill the silence. But I stayed on the bench. I had to let him finish his own thought. "I'm glad you're going to the group, David," I said. "I really am, for the kids' sake and for yours." "But not for ours," he asked, a faint hope in his voice. "There is no ours anymore, David. That song is over. We've reached the final chord, and as sad as it is, it's also complete." He looked at me for a long time, and for once he didn't look past me. He didn't look for the better version of me. He just saw me. He nodded slowly, turned around, and walked out of the hall. He didn't rush. He didn't run. He just walked until he was gone. I turned back to the piano and began a new piece. A different melody, a different rhythm, a different life. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. It wasn't the dramatic courtroom-shattering event you see in movies. There were no outbursts, no last-minute pleas for a second chance. It was just a series of signatures on a series of papers, the dry scratching of pens in a quiet room. When it was over, David and I stood in the hallway of the courthouse. He looked at me, and for the first time in a decade, he didn't reach for his phone. He didn't look toward the exit. He just stood there letting the moment exist in its entirety. "I'm taking the kids to the lake this weekend," he said, his voice steady. "I'm leaving the phone in the glove box, just for an hour. I'm going to try to hear the water." "That's a good start, David," I said. And I meant it. I didn't want him to be miserable. I just couldn't be the one to watch him miss his own life anymore. Life in my apartment became a symphony of small completed acts. I realized that for 10 years, I had been living in a state of constant low-level fight or flight. I had been bracing myself for the interruption, for the sudden shift in energy, for the rug to be pulled out from under the melody. Now that tension was gone. I would make a cup of tea and sit by the window watching the steam rise until the last wisp disappeared. I would read a book page by page until I reached the final period of the final chapter. I would sit on the floor with Leo and Maya, and we would play board games where the only goal was to finish the game, not to optimize the strategy. Leo's first recital after the divorce was the real turning point. He was playing a difficult piece by Debussy, the one he had almost given up on. The auditorium was crowded, the air thick with the scent of perfume and nervous energy. I sat in the middle row, my heart in my throat. David was sitting 3 rows ahead of me. I watched the back of his head, my eyes fixed on his hands. I wanted to see if they would twitch. I wanted to see if he would reach for his pocket. Leo walked onto the stage looking taller, more sure of himself. He bowed, sat at the grand piano, and began to play. The music was like water shifting, shimmering, and full of light. It was a long piece, nearly 8 minutes of complex atmospheric sound. At the 4-minute mark, the usual danger zone for David, I saw David's hand move. He shifted in his seat. He leaned forward. My heart sank. Here it comes, I thought. He's going to check the time. He's going to look at a notification. He's going to skip the moment. But David didn't pull out his phone. Instead, he gripped the armrest of his chair so hard his knuckles turned white. He was physically fighting the urge to move on. He was forcing himself to stay in the room, to stay with his son, to stay with the music. He sat through the bridge. He sat through the quiet, contemplative middle section. He sat through the final, soaring crescendo. And when Leo hit the last chord and let it ring out into the silent hall, David was the first person to stand up. He was cheering before the sound had even fully faded. I sat in my seat and cried. Not because I wanted to go back to him, but because I realized that the skip wasn't a death sentence for him. It was just a habit he had to choose to break every single day. And he was finally choosing to break it for the people who mattered most. I've started recording my own music now. I have a small studio set up in my second bedroom filled with plants and the warm light of a few well-placed lamps. The album is called The Whole Song. It's a collection of pieces that don't have catchy hooks or radio-friendly intros. They are long, slow, and intentional. They require you to sit still. They require you to listen to the end. Sometimes when I'm sitting at the piano late at night, I think about that Reddit post I wrote. I think about all the people who told me I was crazy, that I was throwing away a marriage for something trivial. But then I look around my quiet apartment. I look at my son who is finally confident in his own music. I look at my daughter who knows that when she speaks, she will be heard until she is finished. And I realize that small things are never really small. They are the bricks we use to build our lives. If the bricks are fragmented, the house will eventually fall. I don't know if David will ever find someone who can handle his restlessness or if he'll find a way to quiet the noise in his head forever. But I do know that I am no longer the person waiting for the skip. I am the woman who stays for the encore. I am the woman who hears the silence after the song is over. And that silence, it's the most beautiful sound I've ever heard. It's easy to look at someone else's life and judge the reasons they walk away. We all have those small things that drive us crazy, the way a partner chews, the way they leave the lights on, or the way they always have to have the last word. But I want to ask you, at what point does a small thing become a wall? When does a habit turn into a form of neglect? If you were in my shoes, would you have stayed for another 10 years of unfinished melodies? Or would you have realized, like I did, that your life is worth more than a 30-second preview? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever dealt with a partner whose minor habit felt like a major betrayal? How do you handle the skips in your own life? Let's talk about it. And if you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing for more deep dives into the complex, messy, and beautiful realities of human relationships. Every story has an ending, and I'm glad you stayed to hear this one.